Welcome, welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is European Coalition for Israel. My name is Rebeka Goba. Today, we're here to organize what I believe will be a very insightful and interesting discussion to mark the International Holocaust Remembrance Day, that is this Friday. So we wanted to organize this discussion, but really to have an emphasis on how we can remember Holocaust, but more importantly, how can we pass Holocaust remembrance to the next generations. But first, I would like to start with welcoming our panelists. I'm really honored and privileged to have Mr. Sergey Lagodinsky join us today, who is a member of the European Parliament from Germany, and also a vice chair of the European Parliament Working Group Against Anti-Semitism. Mr. Lagodinsky, thank you for joining us and welcome.
Thanks so much.
And of course, we also have Dov Forman, who is an award-winning author, social media creator, TikTok phenomenon. We'll hear more about it later. But we're very excited to have you, Dov, join us. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Very honored to be here today and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you. So just to share a bit more about the outline of this discussion today, we really want to touch these subjects of Holocaust remembrance, but also the rise of anti-Semitism, but also how can we today foster and promote Jewish life in Europe, but also beyond in the world. But so first we would like to start with Holocaust remembrance. And of course, Dov is here to really inspire us with his story and how he has brought this story of his 99-year-old great-grandmother, Lily Ebert, to the hearts of the whole wide world and has moved millions with his short clips that are also, I'm sure he's going to share more later, but are on one hand educational stories from Auschwitz, but on the other hand stories about how Jewish life and how his great grandmother is practicing it today. So Dov, we're excited to hear your story, but before that, let's have a look at those TikToks for us to have a glimpse of what he is doing on social media. So let's watch that.
My number is 18572. That is what I was. I didn't call me. I was not my name. We were not humans. We were only a number. And we were taken also only for a number.
In the Purim story, Jews were deemed for extinction. However, the Jewish people persevered and survived. Tonight, I celebrate Purim with my amazing 98-year-old great-grandmother, Lily Ebert, an Auschwitz survivor. We wish you a very happy and joyous Purim.
Happy Purim! Enjoy you all the best! They took away my humanity in a way. Took away my life and took away, not mine, they tried only as well, but my families, my parents, my sisters, my brothers, my whole community's life.
As I stand here, my first time in Auschwitz-Birkenau, the place where my great-grandmother arrived as a 20-year-old woman, right here on these train tracks, on this ramp over here, I can't help but think of the vastness. The scale, the industrial scale of killing, a factory built not to reduce, but to kill innocent people for no reason. I'm holding here a picture of my great-grandmother, where you can see a mother and younger sister, both of whom, along with her youngest brother, who she does not have a photo of, were murdered here in Auschwitz-Birkenau on arrival.
In Auschwitz, in the morning, they gave us black water to drink, and that is what they call breakfast. Hello, TikTok. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Have a nice weekend.
I was in the hell, Auschwitz-Birkenau. That was hell. And I choose happiness. I choose life.
Thank you so much again, Dov, for the work that you're doing. Every time I, scroll through your TikTok account, every time I see these videos, I'm really moved to tears. First of all, about what she went through, but how much joy she has in her. And so that's just amazing. And for our viewers, could you please share a bit more about her, about Lily, from from her arrest, from how she was brought to ghetto, but also to how she survived Auschwitz.
Sure. So growing up, my great grandmother was always very much the queen of the family. She has 10 grandchildren and now 36 great grandchildren. And it was always something which I was very much aware of, a Holocaust testimony, a Holocaust story. And it all starts when my great grandmother was a similar age to me. I'm now 19 years old. And when my great grandmother was 20, in 1944, the Nazis invaded Hungary, one of the last countries to be invaded by the Nazis. And very quickly, everything changed overnight. My great grandmother was taken from her nice home. She had 5 siblings. They were 6 children altogether. And overnight, the Nazis came, arrested them, and took them to the ghetto, where all the Jews in the town were taken to the worst part of the town and were put into the worst rooms, 1 room per family. And that was when everything changed. They had a few hours to pack all that they could with them, and they did. And one story which I'll mention now is that when they were taken from the ghetto, when they were taken from their homes to the ghetto, my great-grandmother's brother put some jewelry that my great-grandmother and her mother had into the heel of my great-grandmother's mother's shoe. And we'll come back to this story later. And they had this limited jewelry in the ghetto, and they brought some food with them, some things to cook with, but they really didn't even know. And it's really surprising to me now, but also I think when you read our book and when you listen to the TikToks, that even in 1944, the Hungarian community and my great-grandmother really didn't know what was going on in Auschwitz. They didn't really know what was going on, and they didn't know that already 2/3 of European Jewry had been murdered at the hands of the Nazis in places like Auschwitz-Birkenau death camps. And my great-grandmother remembers when they were given the yellow star and when they had to sew it on in the ghetto, and how everything changed. And she often describes it to me. And as a 19-year-old Jewish person now, and when I sit in my home in London, I often think about that within one night, everything changed. The Nazis invaded, and a few days later, they were taken to that ghetto. And they were in the ghetto for a few months. And then in July 1944, my great-grandmother, together with her mother, 3 younger sisters and youngest brother, were taken to the railway station. And they didn't know where they were going. They were told that they were going to go somewhere nicer, where the people would look after them. People would look after the old people, the young people. And the teenagers, like her, would work. Obviously, we know that this isn't true. She was taken on a 5-day journey on the second last transport from Hungary to Auschwitz-Birkenau. And when they arrived, they were told to quickly get off the train. It was a boiling hot summer's day. And my great-grandmother recalls seeing a man with shiny boots and white gloves. And this man was Dr. Mengele. And when they arrived, they were told to stand in groups of 5. My great-grandmother stood with her 3 sisters, her brother, and her mother was also in one of the groups nearby. And she never got to say goodbye to her family. Very quickly, her mother, youngest sister, and youngest brother were ushered to the left. Meanwhile, her and 2 of her sisters were ushered to the right. And that was the last time she ever saw her family. She didn't get to say goodbye. And on that transport, I should mention now, my great-grandmother's mother decided to swap shoes with my great-grandmother. We don't know why she did this. My great-grandmother doesn't know either. And she thinks that perhaps it's because her mother knew that she wouldn't survive. She knew what her fate would be. Perhaps she even knew what Auschwitz was. But as I said, my great-grandmother didn't. And they arrived in Auschwitz in July 1944. My great-grandmother had her mother's shoes with the jewelry in. And when they were told to go and undress before they were given their real showers, they were told to put everything on the sides to undress and put their shoes in one section. And the Nazis usually took away these shoes and gave them clogs to wear. But it looks like the Nazis had run out of clogs, possibly because they were one of the last transports from Hungary. And my great-grandmother was able to keep her shoes with the jewelry. And so my great-grandmother still today actually wears the necklace, which survived with her from Auschwitz, 5 months in the hell of Auschwitz-Birkenau, and then another 5 months in slave labor, working in a munitions factory in Germany. And she is actually one of the only survivors, if not the only survivor, to carry through a piece of gold through Auschwitz that survived with its original owner. And that's one incredible story, which I think helps when we learn about the stories of the Holocaust. So often we learn statistics and numbers, but when you focus on these individual and small stories of hope and small things that help people get through, like this jewelry my great-grandmother had, through from the time of the ghetto to Auschwitz-Birkenau to the slave labor camps, and then post-liberation, this necklace which she wears every day, I think that really helps. And now going fast forwards, almost 80 years, my great-grandmother is able to fulfill the promise that when she was in Auschwitz-Birkenau, she made herself. And that promise was that if she survived, she would tell the world her story. And I think she has done just that. She has fulfilled that promise with our book, Lily's Promise, with our TikTok, Lily, Ebert and Dov Forman, which has now 2 million followers and has been seen by over 1 billion people. And only last week or 2 weeks ago, my great-grandmother was announced to be receiving an MBE from the King of England. And I think it's incredibly appropriate that now, as we approach Holocaust Memorial Day, and also as my great-grandmother is 99, and as we move further from the time of the Holocaust, these Holocaust survivors, including my great-grandmother, are being honoured for their incredibly important work.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Lagodinsky, now hearing this, when we talk about Holocaust remembrance, what is your perception of what do we mean by remembering, and why is remembering important, especially like stories like this that Dov shared?
Well, I mean, it's important for different reasons for different communities. First of all, I mean, if we're talking about the Jewish community, then remembrance is our family history, and keeping it together, knowing where we're coming from and what the previous generations had to endure, and also deriving from it lessons to what it means to be Jewish in the current world, and also to be a minority in the current world. And this is a different story and a different impact for the Jewish community than it is, of course, for the world beyond and around us. And even there, there are different perspectives. I think that, coming from Germany, I think that remembrance in Germany signifies something different. And I would say that a remembrance in Austria, or in Hungary, for that matter, in countries with a significant participation in what happened on the perpetrator side, this is also a different message and a different symbol. There it is, at least, speaking from the German perspective, it is part of a German identity, kind of a negative narrative that forms what Germany is now into a positive direction. And for other countries, I used to have to deal with Thessaloniki, for example, Saloniki, where there is a struggle in getting to terms to those many layers of persecution of Jews that happened in Saloniki after the flourishing history. And there is this also not real willingness to, I mean, by some, yes, but for many people, they don't want to deal with this. And for Europe or for the world, it's yet another perspective. It's a major genocide, and it's a major tragedy that has caused a huge gap in Europe, in European population, but also in European culture, that will never be filled. And it's one thing to say, well, this gap was there, now it's not, these people were there, now it's a gap, and let's not think about. And another thing is to say, there's something missing. And this something is missing component is probably something that is and should remain relevant for the young generation and for European society. Let's focus on that, for European society. And by that I include, of course, also United Kingdom, because for me, United Kingdom never left. So that's, I think, these are maybe at least three distinct different perspectives from what we are in both cases. The first case as children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren of survivors and also of perpetrators, how this shaped our societies. And maybe for the rest is what is missing there and the feeling that something is missing.
Thank you so much. And of course, Dov, you have brought this Holocaust remembrance in a very tangible and understandable way to the younger generation in the language they can understand, in the length that they have enough attention span to watch. So so can you share a bit how did it all started, and what was your great-grandmother's reaction to this suggestion of yours?
Yes, well, I think it's firstly a great problem that we have now in the Holocaust education world, also in education in general, but of course we're now focusing on Holocaust education, which is that the younger generation find it impossible to understand and comprehend, to learn through statistics and textbooks about the Holocaust, especially as time goes on and they hear from less eyewitnesses. And also during COVID, when they weren't able to go and visit the sites like the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial Site and all of the memorial sites across what is now Germany and Poland. And I think the problem that I saw during COVID was actually from the other side, that the survivors weren't able to do what they had loved doing for so long, and their life mission, which is to go out and educate young children about what they went through and the horrors that they suffered in that time period. And I saw that my great-grandmother felt that she wasn't able to fulfill that promise that I spoke about earlier, and that she wasn't able to go out, and she felt quite lonely. And one day I was asking her, she moved in with us during COVID, and I continued to ask her more and more questions about her testimony. And I thought, I have to record this, even if it's just for the family. And I began doing that. And then I continued to ask her more things. And I said, can you show me some tangible things, any evidence that you have from the time, any documents, any pictures? And she began showing me. And one day, it actually all started on Twitter, not on TikTok. My great-grandmother showed me a banknote that was given to my great-grandmother upon liberation from the Death March in 1945, on the 13th of April, 1945, by an American Jewish liberator. And on this banknote, this American liberator didn't write his name. He wrote his position in the army, and he wrote 10 words of hope. To start to a new life, good luck and happiness. And as my great-grandmother showed me this, I realized, wow, I'd never been taught about the kindness of the liberators. And not only that, look how much it meant to my great-grandmother. She kept this banknote at the time for 76 years, kept away in pristine condition in the back of her cupboard. And so I decided I would tweet this photo with the world. And I didn't think that anyone would be interested. I had 64 followers at the time. And I tweeted it. And I remember joking with my great-grandmother that I would find the soldier within 24 hours. And within 8 hours, 2 million people had seen the tweet. It had turned into an international hunt for this mystery soldier who we didn't have the name of. And we managed to find him. Unfortunately, he passed away, but his wife and family were still alive. And we managed to reconnect. And by the time we'd reconnected, unfortunately, his wife had also passed away, but his children were still alive. And it opened up for them a whole new story and a whole new world that they had not been exposed to. They didn't know these type of stories about their father. And it was at that moment that I realized that I had a platform and that I had an opportunity to actually influence other people in the world through one click of a button, the button that says tweet. And every single person has this, I think, tool which they really can use in a positive and impactful way. And many people weren't doing that during COVID. There was, during the pandemics and during the lockdown, there was a rise in anti-Semitism, a rise in hatred, a rise in hate speech on all social media platforms across the world. And I realized, right, I have to do more. And eventually I saw that hundreds of thousands of people are going viral on TikTok for doing stupid things like dancing and singing. And I said to my great-grandmother, why don't we start a TikTok? We have something to share. And I think that we could also gain an audience that actually wants to learn and listen. And my great-grandmother was reluctant at first. She had seen it on the news and she said, I'll do it, but I'm not dancing. And so we set up an account and we don't dance, we answer questions. And we have really set up a platform where young people feel comfortable to ask any question that they want. And a lot of people often say to me, look, they're so ignorant, they're so naive, look at the questions they're posting. But I think for us, we want it to be open. We want people to feel comfortable to ask any question they want. We receive thousands, at the very minimum, questions every single day from young people across the world in countries where they actually are not even allowed to teach about the Holocaust. And I think when people ask why we've had so much success, if you want to call it, on social media and on TikTok, I think it's because of that. We've created a place where young people in a society and in an era where many people don't want to learn and aren't teaching, we've created a place where there's an open discussion about the Holocaust. And whilst at some times it might be an uncomfortable discussion and the questions might be uncomfortable, we have to answer them because these are the last moments. Only this week, We saw one of the most prominent Holocaust survivors in the UK, Ziggy Schipper, pass away on his 93rd birthday. And this was someone who traveled up and down the country to go and tell his story to young children. And his message was always the same: do not hate. And it's that message which we need to continue into forever. And the only way we can do that is through providing the survivors a platform to do that.
Thank you. And listening to your story, I keep thinking about what kind of a role we as young generation, but you as an influencer and other influencers on different kinds of social media accounts, how can they reach, and have a bigger influence? So, Mr. Lagodinsky, do you think there is a way that young generation or people like Dov, how can they take part at a political level and somehow add to the efforts of political efforts of Holocaust remembrance?
Well, I'm not sure about political, but that's it's a challenge, and it's a mission for politics and policy to find ways of supporting and promoting new voices who will follow the survivors and the witnesses. There is this term, I don't know if it's in English the same, in German it's Zeugenzeugen, so the witnesses, who will be the next to carry the flag of remembrance. And I think, when I listened to Dov and saw these stories, the most powerful thing transcends generations and transcends, the eras of history. It's storytelling, powerful storytelling, which now should just find other storytellers and also other means of how to tell stories that would reach to the young people or to their children in the future. And I think this is such a huge chance for us, and had such a huge luck that we have people like Dov who do have both of these worlds. They still have the stories of survivors, and they can tell the stories, and they know how to do it to spread the word, and that is unique, and this is something that we should support. I also think that new, more innovative ideas should be supported, and they are supported. We have a strategy against anti-Semitism on the EU level with Katharina von Schnorbein, who is great in finding ways and collaborations and bringing people together, young people as well. But again, I think at the core of it, it will always be about telling your own or someone else's stories and trying to touch someone's heart through this. That's the only way.
Yes, I agree. Sorry.
If I can, I would just say and flip that point in terms of how governments and MEPs and MPs and officials in all sectors of and walks of government could help people like me, the young people who are trying to do this. And I think there's a number of ways they can do that. One is firstly, just listening to the needs of those young people who are doing this work. I think the main thing which we suffer from, and this is young people across the world, and rightly so often young people are told you don't have a seat at the table and you can't change the world. And usually they're right. A young person can't usually change the world. But I think as we move more into the digital era and as we see the world transforming onto the online scale, I think young people should have a seat at that table and should be listened to. And they do have a lot to say, and they do have innovative ideas, and they really can make a difference in these areas like Holocaust education. And I think if we look at Holocaust education 3 years ago, before there were people like me online doing this, and we look at it now, I think it's entered a totally new age and a totally new era. And the amount of people being reached, I think, is exponentially greater. And so if I were to flip that back, I think there's a number of ways that people in government and parliaments across the world can help. Another one of those is like we have going through the parliament in the UK now is online harm bills to reduce anti-Semitism, racism of all kinds on social media. It's so important. I think we need to hold the online platforms accountable. I know on TikTok the amounts of abuse and racism and disgusting, vile messages that we receive. I don't like to focus on those because I think there's so much positive as well. But I think we do need the support of governments and officials across the world to come together and hold these social media platforms to account, but also provide the young people with a seat at the table and listen to their needs and want to help them. And I think as has been mentioned, there's incredible already support networks in place, but I think there's a long way to go. And of course we have there was the EU conference in November where we spoke about ways to connect with other young people, but also older people on things like this. And I think conferences like those where we speak about fostering Jewish life and enabling Jewish activism is so important.
Yes. Moving now to the issues of today, rising anti-Semitism. Dov, of course, as you said, you don't want to focus on that. And when we also have met, when we recorded this interview, I remember that you said that you are experiencing some reactions, but you don't want to focus on that. But just a little bit, what is your personal experience of living as a young Jew in Europe today, and also connected to your activism? Is there anything that you experience?
So it's the answer will be multifaceted in the sense that there's two. I'll speak about myself as a young Jewish person living in England and Europe facing anti-Semitism, and I'll also speak about myself as an activist online facing anti-Semitism, because I think it's two very different things. In terms of the first one, as a young Jewish person living in England, London, but also visiting Europe very often, experiencing a lot of anti-Semitism there, I'll speak about that first. I think that people who don't live in Europe would imagine that having a stranger as you're walking home from school with your kippah or any Jewish sign on, having someone scream at you, "You dirty Jew," from their car window is something that only happened in the 1930s in Nazi Germany. Unfortunately, it's not the case. It happens today across Europe, across England, across London. People might think that as a 5-year-old on the way to shul, on the way to synagogue, seeing hundreds of security guards as you're walking to school outside each synagogue is something that only happened in Nazi Germany. It's not true, it happens today. And it's the sad reality of our lives that unfortunately people think that anti-Semitism went away with the Holocaust. It's definitely not the case. Anti-Semitism is rising faster than ever. In the UK last year, there was a month when anti-Semitism rose by 500% because of instances related to Israel and Gaza and that escalation there. And I think it's the sad reality that we live in. And if you look in mainland Europe, you see French Jews are being driven out by the day. And there's, of course, the mass immigration to Israel now. But I have plenty of friends who used to live in France who moved to London, and they would tell me stories of how unsafe they would feel on the streets. And it's incredibly sad. And I think that's the personal level in terms of there is a rise of anti-Semitism across the world, of course. But I think also a problem we have in Europe is in other countries, it might be on the far extremes, the far extreme left, the far extreme right, maybe only one of them. I think in Europe, we're seeing anti-Semitism from all sides. And it's also seeping into the mainstream, into the center. And that's one great problem that we have. And it's not just from the radicals, as I said, it really is on all sides and from all types of people. I think that we had the great scare in England in 2019 with Jeremy Corbyn, the former leader of the opposition of the Labour Party, who for the first time, I think, since probably the Holocaust, led British Jews really to consider what their future is in England. And I think when you start to get a situation like that, like now Jews have in France, I think it's incredibly frightening and incredibly worrying. And there's a lot to do and a lot to say about that. And then myself as a Jewish person, an activist on social media with now 2 million followers, the amount of anti-Semitism I get is beyond belief. Every single day I wake up to messages from often the same people, but often new people too, who all they want to do is to terrorize a young Jewish person because of the fact that a young Jewish person has a platform to share about what it means to be Jewish and about what it means to for my great grandmother's side to survive the Holocaust and rebuild a Jewish family. And people will always resent that, and people will always send us hate messages for that. I'm very thankful that the UK Police and Community Securities Trust have been so supportive with us on that front. It's incredibly important, and I thank also MEPs, MPs, so many people have helped us on this project and on being in touch with different people to combat this anti-Semitism. Unfortunately, it will never go away, and that's why I don't like focusing on it, because anti-Semitism is the oldest hatred, and it will probably continue forever. And there's not much we can do apart from try to raise awareness about what happened in the past, because ordinary people were perpetrators of the Holocaust. But most of us will never be a perpetrator. But ordinary people were also bystanders to the Holocaust, and plenty of us could easily become bystanders. And plenty of people are bystanders now, not only with anti-Jewish racism, but racism of all kinds. And it's up to us, especially this week ahead of Holocaust Memorial Day this Friday, to decide what we do with this. Do we stand up? Are we vigilant? Do we say that intolerance and injustice is not okay? And if not, we have to ask ourselves why. And also, as Jewish people, I often ask myself, am I doing enough for other people? Am I standing up enough for other people? Because if I want other people to stand up for me, I have to realize that I also have to stand up for them. And I think that's really the message to take out of this. I don't think anti-Semitism will ever go away. And of course, we can put in measures to reduce that. But the main thing to do is realize what messages can we learn from the rising anti-Semitism.
Thank you so much for sharing your own personal story also. And Mr. Lagodinsky, thinking about you as a vice chair of this European Parliament working group against anti-Semitism, what can European Parliament do? What is European Parliament doing? Also in connection to Germany, as we know that recently there was the strategy against anti-Semitism launched. Yeah, perhaps your remarks on this.
Well, I think that these are the usual elements of strategy. We will not be able to invent a kind of a silver bullet, and Dov actually mentioned it by saying it will remain, unfortunately, and will survive us. But we can always work on reducing the attractiveness of this ideology. And I think, the usual components are education, law enforcement, and strengthening democracy. And these are the three components that I think we should be building on. And within those components, we always can look for innovative and new approaches. So education, I think it's most instrumental to do also adult education, not just at schools, and political education, as they call it in Germany. Because, to be honest, the most disgusting and the most difficult and complex anti-Semitism forms are those that people don't even notice. And Dov mentioned during the COVID times, I myself, when I spoke to so many, the vaxxers, the anti-vaccine movement, most of the models and patterns that were expressed were basically anti-Semitism. And even if the Jews were not mentioned, it was very clear that they were meant. And how to get to that? That's actually an interesting experience. I think this was an interesting experience to see how actually this and what is happening now in Russia, to see how broad population, like vast population groups, can basically derail, their understanding of this world can be derailed so easily that it becomes kind of a massive neurosis. It's because we used to ask ourselves, how could it be possible during the Nazi times? Like me living in Germany, you walk through the streets, you talk to the people. I was 18 when I came to Germany and moved to Germany, and this was always, the curious question. I'm sure you asked yourself as well. How was it possible that in Germany or in Austria or in Hungary, people just turn against their neighbors? And actually, we saw how this, in a situation of crisis, where people are under pressure, things are activated that you never could have thought that things would be activated in human beings. And the same as now, what I see when I see the Russian TV and Russian narratives among population. So the question is, how can we preventively implant into people the notion of being careful with those patterns? This is very, very difficult. And I think a lot of it is also about democracy, and a lot of it is also about resilience of our democracy, not militant. I don't like the term militant democracy, but resilient democracy which is able to regenerate despite crisis and to remain open and protective over minorities. More money, because you asked something else. You asked what we can do, and I think it's of course a very often support through financial means. This is the leverage that we have. More programs. We have a program on values, the SERVE programs from the European Union for NGOs, for projects. It's important that this becomes an integral part for those, that NGOs also know how to apply to this, that we have lower barriers for applications, especially if it's about democracy education or anti-Semitism education. We do need to improve law enforcement on those areas because, and I see this in many countries, police people don't know anything about anti-Semitism, and therefore there is no law enforcement, or it's too late with law enforcement. So a lot of also educational challenges there, and I do think that the democracy structures have to be strengthened rather than demolished. And there I come back to, I'm sorry, to Hungary, where the current government did not, despite all their proclaimed support for Israel and also, for Jewish life, but then they just copy anti-Semitic patterns and project them on someone else, or they use kind of a subcutaneous, so there's a very subtle hate against Jews like Soros to get political capital. So it's anti-Semitism comes in various and different shadings. It is never the same, because people say, it's like now in Europe, oh yeah, well, it's not like during the Nazi period, so it cannot be anti-Semitism. Well, everyone knows that in Nazi period, anti-Semitism was ugly and now not acceptable. So everyone uses, of course, other shapes and colors of this disgusting phenomenon. And we have to be able to recognize it and to dismantle it. And this is what the education is for. Always on alert and always able to question ourselves as members of society and our own stereotypes, and digging. This is what we have to learn and to teach the young generation.
Yeah, so moving to fostering Jewish life, as we know that fostering Jewish life is actually at the heart of this EU strategy, because we know that only Jewish life can only be possible in Europe if their life, if their customs, traditions are allowed. So Dov, perhaps briefly, when you look back at the history and you look at today, what are the red lines or the things you think that if they're crossed, then we're actually going back in the same direction in terms of Jewish life and traditions?
It's a difficult question, which I think probably maybe in some countries the red line has already been passed. I mean, I already mentioned France. I would also just go back on a point which was mentioned, which is that, of course, we have to increase police awareness and the policing. I think another thing, by the way, is also judiciary.
Actually, if I can follow the idea that
please.
Dov said, because being a lawyer myself, and I've always, this is exactly the very important point. It's not just about police; it's also about judges. I read rulings of some courts, some German courts, magistrates, etc., where they used Wikipedia articles to determine whether something is anti-Semitism or not. I mean, in the ruling itself.
It's definitely what I see as the problem now, and going forward, something which has to be amended in all European countries, also countries across the world, which is that, again, it's one thing to improve policing, it's another thing to actually then let that be seen through the courts, through the judges, and actually create meaningful change, because otherwise you don't allow, there will be no fear and people will continue because they know, okay, I'll get arrested and then nothing will happen. So I think that's, if maybe I could call that a red line, I think that's something which has to be improved. Look, I think the red line will be different for every country and every community. So I can't give you a list now off the top of my head. But I think it's as much as just recognizing the signs of the past and learning, and in places where we see that people haven't learned and that racism and anti-Semitism is rising, we have to be vigilant and we have to put in place measures, and we have to encourage those countries to put in place strategies, whether it be a 5-year plan, a few-year plan, however long it is, to actually implement tangible differences. It can't just be words. We've seen words time and time again. They haven't worked. After the Holocaust, we said never again. And we've seen subsequent genocides after that. So I think, again, as the EU strategy on anti-Semitism is doing, is encouraging other countries to actually put in place plans to encourage countries to help combat this worrying rise and worrying not only worrying rise in anti-Semitism, but worrying rise in hatred of all kinds. So I think that's something, again, which has to be demanded of all countries, a strategy to actually have proper red lines for themselves in place and see what they're going to do to combat that. I think that's all I'll say. In terms of red lines of what you'll see in society, I think, again, it will be different in every society, in every country. So I can't really provide a list now.
But the red lines that I'm thinking about, and I've seen in some countries in Europe that Jewish communities are experiencing that these red lines are crossed, are some traditions, customs as kosher slaughter, circumcision.
Yeah.
What is so for you, Mr. Lagodinsky, do you see that there is a need or a reality where we actually need to really protect and that some of these customs are endangered in Europe today?
I do think that there are issues, and we have also to be clear that there is also work for us to do to explain certain things, because on the surface we do have clashes of values, and there is this ambivalence on certain traditions, and it is in tension with certain principles that we think a modern European society should be guided by. I do think that we have to do some explaining, but also discussions regarding why a traditional slaughter, is something that should be not in the conflict, but alongside with protection of animals. I think there are arguments of how to explain things also to those who are convinced that animals should not suffer. This circumcision debate also has been, there is also a question, also a constitutional question regarding that. And we need to find ways of how such questions can be resolved. And I don't think that the best way here is by banning discussion. I don't think that by saying that everyone who questions circumcision is an anti-Semite, or anyone who is saying that the ritual slaughter is a problem is an anti-Semite. No, in many cases they're not. But we have to explain to them why their position may be either wrong or is feeding certain anti-Semitic narratives, or is leading to an extinguishing of Jewish life, which should not happen. And this can be done in a dialogue, and this has to be done in a dialogue, because we will not win this debate if we stop this debate or taboo this debate. It's not going to work, not with this young generation that both Rebeka and Dov represent here. I'm sure you can attest this as well. The young generation does not want to be told that certain issues should not be discussed. So we should discuss those issues, as long, of course, as these are, sane discussions and not like a flagrantly anti-Semitic bullshit.
Dov, it's amazing that you have your great grandmother still here, and in connection to our now discussion about Jewish life and the future of Jewish life, has she given you any advice? How does she look to your life? Does she have some worries? What does she think of Jewish life today, and for her children, grandchildren, and her great grandchild?
I think she has both sides. I mean, my good grandmother is obviously incredibly worried whenever she sees anti-Semitism or hatred in the world, and especially when there's big incidences on the news and that she hears about or is told about. But I think she's also incredibly hopeful and positive for the future. I think we're in a day and age, again, where discussion is encouraged. And of course, there's also discussion a lot, which is discouraged. But I think we are entering a place where people, I think, increasingly from all minorities have a voice. And so I think that is what to be hopeful for. And of course, when we talk about this, it will always come out and people come out and say how bad it is, because it is incredibly worrying and there's a lot to fear. But I think there's also a lot to be hopeful for.
Thank you, Dov. The sound was not the best, but we understood your what you tried to say. So final questions, of course, in our audience, the purpose of this was to really encourage young people. We heard your story, Mr. Lagodinsky, in the conference, which is also very interesting, inspiring, and I think this is what it needs. And as you said, this is what the young people need. They need stories. They want to hear. And this is how I connect, how Dov connects to people and to different realities. But just for like final encouragement for anybody that is a young person watching now us, of course, we have people from older generations, of course, but perhaps with you, Mr. Lagodinsky, for both Jewish young adults and non-Jewish, when they face all the realities that we discussed today, what would be your brief message?
The message is that life goes on and we always prevail. We being the good, people and their joy. Even if you watch at Lily, at great grand, if you watch her and look at her, the great grandmother of Dov, there is of course this deep mourning that I think is still working in her, but there is also this joy that she is sharing with us, and I think this is the positive message that we should nurture, that even from death comes life, and that we should do everything that this new life, Jewish life in Europe, which is not the same as it used to be, but it's here, and that we should do everything to keep it ongoing, and we should also do everything to support other minorities, majorities, whoever, Democrats, citizens, in their livelihood, in their democracy, in their rights and freedoms.
Thank you. And Dov, your final words from a young person to other young people. What is your encouragement?
Well, I hope my Wi-Fi works, but I think so I'll keep it short. my message to other young people would be to stand up and to use your voice. I think you have an incredibly powerful voice, and whilst some people might overlook that, I think you can create meaningful change. And at 16 years old, I was able to realize that, and I've now reached over 1 billion people on TikTok and social media. And it's not about me, and it's not about my numbers, and it's really about showing people that you can create meaningful change. And yeah, I think I can see my Wi-Fi is about to cut out, so I will keep it at that.
Thank you. And of course, I encourage everybody to check out Dov's TikTok, Dov and his great grandmother Lily Ebert's TikTok that they're doing now together. It's at Lily Ebert, and it's the most beautiful, touching thing there is. I really encourage everybody to have a look at their account after this webinar. And thank you for both of you for these encouraging words to the young generation. And I know that for myself, when I was still, in this stage where I try to understand what is what, and I think this is really important that we can hear from like politicians as you, Mr. Lagodinsky, but also from you, Dov, and from the way you have touched the whole world. So, but we also have an encouraging message from the EU coordinator against the anti-Semitism fostering Jewish life, Katharina von Schnurbein. So let's have a look at her message to this webinar.
Distinguished guests, dear friends of the ECI. This past year, Felix Kolmer passed away in his hometown Prague at the age of 100. I used to call him my favorite Holocaust survivor, one of the kindest, wisest, and upright people I've met in my life. Deported to Theresienstadt and later to Auschwitz, he kept a clear compass throughout the atrocities that he had to endure. When I met him in 2003, he over and over retold the painful story of his survival to pupils in schools and in particular to children in Germany. He saw it as a service to society. And he told me what it meant to truly forgive. Ask how he feels towards Germans, he said, I do not feel the slightest hatred in me, but we must not forget. His and the testimonies of all survivors have immense power. We shall not forget. We remember. We must remember the millions of Jewish women, men, and children, and the many other victims that were murdered by the Nazi regime and their collaborators. We owe it to them, to the survivors, to their families, and to future generations. 34% of Europeans surveyed say they know little or have never heard of the Holocaust. Holocaust education is key to safeguarding our European heritage and to learn from this darkest chapter. Whenever the facts about the Holocaust are no longer known, Holocaust distortion is left unchallenged. It is our duty to protect our societies from any attempt to rewrite history. How pressing and present this risk is became apparent since the early days of the invasion of Ukraine. We saw a rise in Holocaust denial and distortion, as well as old anti-Semitic conspiracy myths resurging. Anti-Semitism did not end with the Holocaust, and we must do whatever it takes to combat it in all its forms. This is the commitment we made in October 2021, when the European Commission adopted its first ever EU strategy on combating anti-Semitism and fostering Jewish life. Among its almost 100 actions, over half have already been set in motion, with many of them focusing on Holocaust education, research, and remembrance. This is largely thanks to the immense support this strategy received from the outset among member states, the European Parliament, Jewish communities and organizations, and civil society organizations such as the European Coalition for Israel. I am pleased that your event today was inspired by our civil society forum, where we gathered in Brussels in November last year over 200 civil society organizations involved in fighting anti-Semitism, Holocaust remembrance, safeguarding Jewish heritage. I understand that's where you met Dov, Rebeka, and also Member of Parliament Sergey Lagodinsky. This year, we commemorate in particular the 80th anniversary of major uprisings, such as those at the Warsaw and Białystok ghetto, the uprising in the Treblinka and Sobibor death camps. They are part of our history that we must preserve and learn from, not only in academic research, but in our daily and local reality. In this spirit, one of the key actions of our strategy is to create a network of sites where the Holocaust happened, such as hiding places, deportation points, and Jewish heritage sites all over Europe. Yesterday, we kicked off an informal consultation process on the network's goal. We will publish a report on this We will publish a report on the outcomes in June, and it is my wish to see this network grow on the ground in cities and towns across the continent over the next months and decades. The Shoah was a European tragedy, but it happened locally. Victims of Nazi occupation could at the same time become perpetrators against their Jewish neighbors, while others stood silently by. And yet others had the courage to hide their neighbors at the risk of their own lives. We can learn a lot from those. Holocaust remembrance is not only our historic responsibility. It is the best investment we can make towards a Europe free from anti-Semitism and any form of distortion. It is the litmus test of our generation to ensure that the memory of the victims of the Shoah will live on, that every child learns about the Holocaust, and that such atrocities never happen again. Thank you very much.
Big thanks to Katharine von Schnoban for her support to this webinar, also on her words. Just to conclude, remembering the Holocaust is really, as she just also mentioned, the responsibility of each and every one of us. It's not only at the political level, or it's really in our cities, in our villages, in our towns, in our countries, where we can raise a voice and really not be bystanders, because we know that indifference is no better than evil itself, as Elie Wiesel has said it. So thank you everybody for joining us. As I said, please go to Dov's TikTok, share his story, share his great grandmother's story on this Holocaust Remembrance on the 27th also, as we will be marking this day. But a really, really practical thing that you can do as a young person, but not only, is that European Coalition for Israel, our efforts to combat anti-Semitism have gone under the slogan, I'm my brother's keeper. And we have come up with a campaign where each one of you can record yourself saying, I am my brother's keeper, to really stand up against anti-Semitism. And you can post this on your own social media wall, feed, in any of the platforms. You can tag European Coalition for Israel and add the hashtag I'm my brother's keeper, so we can see you and reshare this video of yours. So together we can really say it collectively. But also we have already prepared a campaign video where people from different continents, backgrounds, countries, cold and hot, have sent in already their I am my brother's keeper. And we have compiled it together in a very moving clip. And with that, we would also like to conclude and say thank you to Dov for everything you do, but also for finding time to join this webinar today. And of course, for the member of the European Parliament, Sergey Lagodinsky, for his time in this very busy season. Thank you so much for all the viewers that joined us, and we look forward to see you next time.
We all unite across the world, doing our best, doing our efforts to rise up against anti-Semitism, to stand up against anti-Semitism, to say not on my watch. And not on my watch, I personally say, because I am my brother's keeper.
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 I am my brother's keeper.